Before we begin today's lesson, I'd like to note that Valentine's Day is quickly approaching. With that in mind, myself and a couple of my YouTube artist friends decided to collaborate and all create 10-minute pieces based off the holiday. Not only are these fantastic artists, but they're fantastic people as well. First, we have Lisa, who actually inspired me to create this channel in the first place. Then we have Will, who did a beautifully textured surreal piece. And then we have Sheldean, who is obviously a master of hyper-realism. I'd highly implore you to subscribe and check out all of their channels. They are honestly some of my favorites. With that said, let's jump into today's lesson. We are going to begin on our rainy day here in the sky in the background with a large square-headed brush and titanium white. Then I'm mixing in a little bit of primary blue and working my way around the edges of the previously applied titanium white in a dabbing motion with an old square-headed brush. Now, the bristles on this brush kind of leaf off in varying directions, so when you make a tapping motion, you create the impression of a litany of different leaves going off in different directions. It saves a lot of time and it's really efficient. As I move forward in the painting, I'm making my leaves slightly darker and slightly more saturated. So as you can see here in the third layer, it's a darker blue. Now as we move on to the fourth layer, I'm moving again on top of the blue, but this time with a green. This green is a mixture of primary blue, titanium white, and some primary yellow as well. I'm just doing this yet again in the same cathartic tapping motion that I used initially, and it's just this very pragmatic progression. In the back where the light is, everything's kind of washed out. You get the colors of the blues that are reflecting off the sky and everything else. And as we move closer to us where the light is less dominant, you get more of the natural green colors that exist within trees, and it's going to get darker as well. So just remember to go from a white to a lighter blue to a darker blue to a mixed blue-green, and we're just slowly going to build those on top of each other as we move into the foreground. Then I'm taking a medium-sized square-headed brush with a mixture of Mars Black and titanium white, and I'm going to implement a bridge. I'm using this brush because a square-headed brush can render fairly sharp edges because of its sharp edges, and that matches with the aesthetic of stone. I'm then going to take a darker version of that same gray and apply an underside to our bridge. This is going to give it some added dimension and ensure that the painting looks much more three-dimensional than it would have otherwise. I'm going to take that same color and then apply it as brick, or rather stone, in the rest of the painting here. And I'm doing this fairly loosely. I'm blending it in. I don't want these bricks to really stand out. I just want them to complement the piece. I don't want them to be too distracting. Then I'm taking a very light gray and I'm applying that on top. And this is kind of a handrail. Again, this is just to build a little bit more dimension and add a little bit more interest to our piece here. Then I'm going to take a very small square-headed brush with titanium white and burnt umber, and I'm going to begin implementing a number of trees in the distance. Now, I'm using a fairly good amount of water in the mixture here so that I can ensure that I get long, consistent, sharp strokes. If your paint is very dense and it's kind of clumpy, it'll be really difficult to create these long, consistent strokes. And again, easily the way to aid that is simply to add water to your mix and thin the paint out a little bit. It might look more transparent, but that is great here because your trees are in the background and they're going to be lost in a lot of the light and a lot of the foliage. So having them more transparent actually aids the purpose of your painting. From there, I'm going to take my square-headed brush yet again and in a tapping motion, apply a darker, more highly saturated green to the foreground. This time, not only am I going to apply it over the initially applied trees, but I'm also going to move it upon the bottom of my bridge as well. And this is just going to bring everything together very cohesively and ensure that they all look like they're a part of the same landscape. And again, as noted previously, as we move forward in the painting, as we get closer to us, we make it darker and darker and darker. There, I added a little bit of additional black, and we're just trying to ensure that we get this very natural progression. Then, we're going to take a break, and I'm going to redraw the couple with Sharpie in the foreground. I'm doing this and letting it dry because I'm going to apply the ground around them, and as opposed to having to paint very neatly around them, I now can paint on top of them because acrylic paint dries fairly transparently and you can generally see under a fairly thin layer. So here I'm going over portions of their body with this mixture of titanium white and burnt umber, and it's fine because I know I'm going to be able to see through it and reapply the people much more easily. So I'm applying the ground predominantly in horizontal strokes. Again, it is lightest in the back, and as we transition into the foreground, it gets darker and darker and darker, but I'm trying to use a tapping, sliding motion to create a good amount of intrigue and detail. Then I'm taking my small square-headed brush and working on a couple of additional trees in the foreground. Just like our trees or our foliage itself, the bark and the body of the tree is also going to get darker and darker as we move closer to us in the foreground. So here, again, I'm using a mixture of burnt umber, of black, and of titanium white, but this time the black and the burnt umber are more dominant, and I'm still using a good amount of water to ensure that they're sharp, but I'm also allowing my trees to be a little bit larger. Because of perspective, trees that are very far away are going to look very small. Trees that are very close to us are going to look much larger. And so these trees can have wider branches, they can be darker, and they're really going to draw the eye in more. Now I'm going into the foreground and working on the grass, foliage, bushes, and all of that. I'm using a darker green, yet again, with this old square-headed brush, and if you don't have one, you can make one very easily by just peeling the bristles back on an extra square-headed brush. It's very, very simple. But I'm just making it darker and darker as we progress into the foreground, and we're kind of creating a vignette around our center of the painting, which really draws the eye in because the eye is naturally going to go to the brightest portion of the painting. So if you ensure that all of the edges of the painting are darker, you ensure that the viewer's eye isn't led out of the painting and it remains where you want it to be. So that's a little trick, a little tip you can incorporate in your paintings as well. The branches can also act as leading lines, and you can kind of direct subconsciously the viewer's eye to varying portions by moving the branches and directing them inwards to wherever you'd like that to be. With all of that being said, we're getting back to the couple. I'm using a very small square-headed brush because it has a sharp edge and it can work great in details while holding a good amount of paint, and I'm beginning to just color in, essentially, the outline drawing of the silhouetted couple that we initially drew. So it's very easy here. I'm ensuring that I'm using a good amount of water because I don't want a grainy effect. I want to ensure that it's fairly soft and smooth in application. And, if it's too transparent because of the water, we can always let it dry, go back and add another layer. Now, because our people are the only thing in the painting that is entirely black, our eyes are naturally going to be drawn to them because of the stark contrast, and so it'll play a really nice role in contrast with a very light, bright light in the background of the painting. But we're just spending a little bit of additional time fixing this up, ensuring our proportions are the way we want them to be, and the painting is going to evoke the emotion we want it to. I'm now going to let the entire painting dry and come back with another old square-headed brush, and I'm taking some white pigment and in a diagonal motion I'm loosely applying water. I'm doing a tapping motion on top of the umbrella, and I'm doing this very soft application. I'm going in, I'm touching the canvas very softly, I'm applying a little bit of pressure, and then I'm relieving pressure. And I'm doing that over and over again. That way, when we apply the paint, it's this very soft feathered transition from no paint to white paint, and then I'm relieving pressure at the end, so we again create that same transition. You want the white to be most dense in the middle of your stroke, and both ends to kind of feather off. You don't want too much white, you don't want too much light, but adding additional water can help thin your paint, and this is just a really easy, fun way of adding additional detail. Adding all of this rain in really helps with the atmosphere, the mood, and all of that. And it's such a cathartic process yet again. And it's repetitive, so you get good at it fairly quickly. All painting is practice and time. So there we have it. That is our 10-minute painting. I had a lot of fun. I truly hope you enjoyed. If you're new to acrylic painting and you'd like to learn more, there is a link in the description to my ebook, Acrylics for Beginners. And of course, I post every Saturday. I hope to see you next Saturday. And please remember, check out Lisa, Will, and Sheldean in the description. All fantastic artists. Really, really beautiful work. I love their channels, and I'm sure you will too. Thank you so much, and stay creative.